My wife betrayed me with the neighbor and falsely accused me to steal $80 million. But when I hired the best private investigator, he discovered she was a serial scammer, and the FBI arrested them both for 18 years. I'm 34 years old. I work in tech. Well, I used to work until all this happened. And I need to tell this story because I've basically been living a nightmare for the last few years that finally had an ending that even I couldn't have imagined. It's one of those stories that when you tell it, people think you're exaggerating or that you made something up, but I swear every word is true. And I have the security camera footage and court documents to prove it. I guess I should start at the beginning, when I met Brittany. It was 2014. I was like 24 years old and had just graduated in computer science. I was working at a medium-sized software company. Nothing special, but it paid well. I met Brittany in the most cliché way possible, at one of those hipster coffee shops where they charge $7 for a coffee. I was in a hurry, tripped over my own backpack like an idiot, and spilled my coffee all over her laptop. She was there working on something. She was a dental hygienist and was reviewing I don't know what documents, and I basically ruined her day. I felt so bad that I offered to pay for cleaning the equipment, gave her my number, and she texted me a few days later. One thing led to another, we started dating, and honestly, at first everything was perfect. You know, that stage where everything is rosy and you think you found your soulmate. We got married in 2015. Bought a modest house in the suburbs of the Northeast, one of those typical starter homes with 3 bedrooms and a small yard. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. Brittany wanted to have kids soon. I wasn't so sure, but I agreed. And in 2016, Chloe was born. When I saw her for the first time in the hospital, I thought my life was complete. Like that moment where you feel like everything makes sense. 3 years later, Mason was born, in 2019. And then I really felt like I had the perfect family. 2 beautiful kids, a wife I loved, our own house, a stable job. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We paid the bills, went out to dinner occasionally, took the kids to the park on weekends. It was a normal, happy life, or so I thought. In 2020. Right, when all the pandemic craziness started, I got an offer that would change everything. A college friend contacted me because he was launching a cybersecurity startup and needed good engineers. The base pay was less than what I was making at my current job, but they offered me stock options, like 200,000 shares of the company. At that moment, the shares were worth practically nothing. It was a company of 5 people working from their homes, but my friend was convinced they had something big. I told Brittany about it, and she wasn't very convinced. Said it was too risky, that we had 2 small kids and couldn't afford to make less money. But something inside me told me to do it, so I accepted the job. Brittany wasn't happy about that. Looking back, I should have taken it as a red flag. But at the time, I just thought she was being practical and responsible. The work at the startup was intense, like I was working 60 or 70 hours a week, many nights and weekends. Brittany started complaining that I was never home, that she was raising the kids practically alone, and she was partly right, but I thought I was building a better future for all of us. The tension at home kept increasing. The fights became more frequent, but I never thought things would get to where they got. In 2021, a new couple moved in next door to our house, Zachary and Denise. Zachary was one of those guys who's obsessed with the gym, you know, the typical one who posts shirtless photos on Instagram every other day trying to be a fitness influencer. He had like a mini gym in his garage and was trying to make training videos for YouTube or something. Denise was a lawyer, a super professional and serious woman, totally opposite to Zachary, to be honest. The 4 of us started having barbecues together on weekends. The kids played in the yard. They seemed like good people. Zachary started offering free training sessions to the neighbors in his garage, and Brittany took interest. She told me she wanted to get in shape after 2 pregnancies, that she needed to do something for herself, and I totally supported her. She started going to Zachary's garage like 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes in the afternoon when I was working. Here comes the part where everything goes to hell. I'm not one of those paranoid guys who check their wife's phone or suspect everything, but in March 2022, I started noticing weird things. Brittany was glued to her phone all the time. She'd laugh alone looking at the screen, go outside to take calls. One night we were lying in bed and her phone vibrated like 10 times in a row, and when I looked at the screen, it said, Zach, with a fire emoji. I asked her what was up, and she said they were just talking about workout routines, not to be ridiculous, but something didn't add up. You know that feeling in your stomach that tells you something's wrong. One day I got home early, like 3 inches the afternoon, because I'd finished a meeting earlier, and Brittany wasn't there. Her car was in the driveway, but she wasn't in the house. The kids were with her mom that day, so the house was empty. I thought, well, maybe she's working out, but something made me walk over there. The garage door was slightly open, and what I saw destroyed me. Brittany and Zachary were kissing, like it wasn't a casual kiss, it was intense, and she had her hands on his chest. I stood there paralyzed. I don't know how long I was standing there like an idiot, but finally I turned around and went back to the house. I was shaking, felt like I was going to throw up, couldn't process what I'd just seen. Here's where I made a mistake. I should have confronted them immediately, but instead I decided to gather evidence. I installed a security camera pointing toward Zachary's garage, one of those that activate with movement and record to the cloud. Over the next 2 weeks, I recorded like 5 videos of them kissing, hugging, even once I saw them coming out of the garage fixing their clothes in a way that made it pretty obvious what they'd been doing. I was planning to confront her with all the evidence. Maybe start divorce proceedings. I don't know. I was processing everything. But they beat me to it in a way I never saw coming. One Tuesday morning. It was April 26, 2022. I remember it perfectly because it's the day my life went completely to hell. I was at the startup office, in a team meeting, when suddenly 2 police officers walked in. They told me I had an arrest warrant for domestic violence. I thought it was a joke. I literally told them it must be a mistake, that I'd never touched my wife. But they handcuffed me right there, in front of all my coworkers, and took me to the police station. Brittany had filed a report that morning saying I'd attacked her the night before, that I'd pushed her against the wall and threatened to kill her. She had photos of bruises on her arms, a split lip, and a detailed story of years of supposed abuse. I spent 48 hours in a cell trying to explain that it was all a lie, that I had evidence that she was being unfaithful to me, but nobody was listening. They assigned me a public defender, who basically told me to accept a plea deal because domestic violence cases almost always favor the woman. They finally released me with a temporary restraining order that prohibited me from coming within 500 feet of Brittany or my own house. They put an electronic ankle monitor on me. Can you believe it? Me, who'd never even had a traffic ticket, suddenly I was a criminal with an ankle bracelet. Brittany got emergency custody of the kids while the case was being resolved. I could only see them once a week, 2 hours, with a social worker supervising. Chloe was 6 years old at that time. Mason was 3. And every time I saw them, they'd ask me why I couldn't come home. Why Mommy said Daddy was bad. Brittany was poisoning their minds. It's called parental alienation, and it's one of the cruelest things you can do to your children. Mason was too young to understand much, but Chloe started to be afraid of me. She'd hide behind the social worker when I tried to hug her. That broke my heart more than anything else. I lost my job because the startup couldn't afford to have someone with pending criminal charges, plus everyone at the office already thought I was an abuser. My stock options, those 200,000 shares I'd worked so hard for, were frozen because technically I was still an employee, but I was on administrative leave or something. I moved to a tiny studio apartment, like I had a mattress on the floor and a laptop. That was it. I started driving Uber to pay rent and lawyers, because I needed a real lawyer to defend myself against these false charges. I hired a guy named Philip, who cost me $350 and in 2 hours, I was basically spending all my savings on this. The next few months were the darkest of my life. I'd go to court every few weeks. The case kept getting postponed for one reason or another. Brittany maintained the abuse story, even added more details over time. Like she said I'd been emotionally abusing her for years, that I'd isolated her from her family and friends. All lies, but very well constructed. At one of the hearings, I saw Zachary sitting in the gallery supporting her, and that's when I realized they'd probably planned all this together. But I couldn't prove it. I only had the videos of them kissing, and my lawyer Philip told me that wasn't relevant to the domestic violence case, even though it showed she had motives to want me out of the house. Fast forward to December 2022. Here's where the story takes a turn that sounds like something out of a movie. Remember the startup where I worked? Well, turns out the software we'd developed was a cybersecurity solution, specialized in detecting vulnerabilities in enterprise systems. In December 2021, a massive vulnerability called Log4j had come to light that affected millions of systems worldwide, and our software could detect and patch this vulnerability better than anything else on the market. Suddenly, the startup went from being worth almost nothing to being one of the most sought-after cybersecurity companies in the world. Amazon Web Services, AWS, was interested in acquiring us. In January 2023, while I was still living in my studio driving Uber with an electronic ankle bracelet, AWS bought the startup for $2.1 billion. Yeah, you read that right. Billion with a B. My 200,000 shares were suddenly worth $49.4 million before taxes, like $28 million after the government took its cut. I went from not being able to pay rent to being a multimillionaire literally overnight. The money was deposited in my account in March 2023, and I honestly didn't know what to do. I was still dealing with the domestic violence case, still had restrictions on seeing my kids. My life was a mess. But now I had $28 million in the bank. I didn't tell anyone about the money at first, not even my family. I kept living in the same studio, kept driving Uber some days, so as not to raise suspicions. But eventually the news of the acquisition came out in tech blogs. They mentioned the founders and key employees, and my name appeared in a TechCrunch article. It didn't take long for Brittany to find out. 2 weeks after the article came out, I got a text message from Brittany. It was the first time she'd contacted me directly since she accused me. The message said something like, "Raymond, I've been thinking a lot about us, and I think I made a mistake. The kids miss you, I miss you. Can we talk?" I almost laughed out loud when I read it. This woman, who had destroyed my life, who had taken my children from me, who had lied in court about abuse that never happened, suddenly wanted to reconcile, right after finding out I was a millionaire. I'm not stupid. I knew exactly what was happening. I responded saying we could talk, but only through lawyers, because I still had a restraining order. She insisted on meeting in person, said there was so much to explain, that it had all been a misunderstanding. I finally agreed to meet at a public cafe, with my lawyer Philip present. Brittany arrived, dressed in a way that was clearly trying to look attractive. Perfect makeup. That dress she knew I liked. She sat down and started with a speech she'd obviously prepared about how she'd been in therapy, how she realized she'd overreacted that night, how she wanted us to be a family again. I let her talk without interrupting. Philip was next to me taking notes. When she finished, I asked her directly, "Brittany, when did you find out about the acquisition?" She turned red, stammered something about how that had nothing to do with it, that she'd been thinking about reconciliation for months. I told her I didn't believe a word, that I knew perfectly well she only wanted the money. She changed tactics then, got aggressive, said that money was community property because I'd earned it while we were married, that she had a right to half. Philip intervened and told her no, that we were in the process of divorce and that given she'd falsely accused me of domestic violence, she had no rights to anything. Brittany got up furious and left. A week later, in April 2023, I received legal documents. Brittany was suing for half the acquisition money, claiming they were marital assets. Additionally, she was requesting modified full custody of the kids, saying, "I now represented a danger because I had resources to flee the country with them." It was absurd but dangerous. Because judges sometimes get nervous when there's a lot of money involved. The hearing was in June 2023. Brittany arrived with a team of expensive lawyers she'd clearly hired with the expectation of winning millions. Her strategy was to paint the picture that she was a mother who was a victim of abuse, who only wanted to protect her children and get what was economically owed to her. My lawyer Philip had been working on something big, and I didn't know exactly what it was until that day in court. When it was Philip's turn to present evidence, he pulled out a laptop and asked permission to play videos. The judge accepted. Philip started by showing the videos I'd recorded of Brittany and Zachary in the garage, kissing, obviously having an affair. Brittany turned pale, but her lawyer argued that wasn't relevant to the domestic violence case, but then Philip played other videos I hadn't seen before. Turns out Philip had hired a private investigator who installed higher quality cameras with audio. In one of the videos, recorded 2 days before Brittany accused me, you could clearly see Brittany and Zachary in the garage discussing the plan. You could hear Brittany saying things like, "I need the bruises to look convincing," and Zachary responding, "Don't worry, I know how to do it without leaving permanent evidence. I've done this before." They were literally planning the false accusations to get me out of the house. There were more videos from previous days where they discussed my work at the startup, about the shares I had, about how if they accused me of domestic violence, she'd get the house and the kids, and eventually part of any money I made. They'd been planning it for weeks. But wait, because it gets worse. The private investigator had dug into Zachary and Brittany's backgrounds and discovered this wasn't the first time they'd done something like this. Zachary, with his personal trainer alias, had had similar problems in 2 previous cities. There was a complaint in California from 2018 where a woman accused him of conspiring with her husband to get her out of her house through false accusations. The case had been settled out of court with a confidentiality agreement. There was another situation in Colorado in 2020 that followed a similar pattern. Zachary would move to a neighborhood with an accomplice, usually a girlfriend or lover. They'd identify married men with good jobs in tech, the woman would start an affair, and then they'd execute the false accusation scheme to get assets and money. What Philip discovered is that Brittany wasn't a victim manipulated by Zachary, but an active participant and possibly just as experienced in this type of fraud. He found records that Brittany had been married before, something she'd never mentioned to me, and her ex-husband had mysteriously disappeared from her life after similar accusations. They couldn't find much about that case because it had been sealed, but it was enough to establish a pattern. In the courtroom, while Philip was presenting all this evidence, I could see Brittany falling apart. Her team of lawyers was trying to object to each exhibit, but the judge was fascinated and angry at the same time. When Philip finished presenting everything, the judge called a 30-minute recess. When we returned, the judge looked furious. He dismissed all of Brittany's claims, both the lawsuit for the money and the petition for modified custody. He ordered her to pay all my legal fees, which at that point totaled like $280,000. And here comes the best part. The judge referred the case to the district attorney for criminal investigation for charges of fraud, false testimony, and conspiracy. But it still wasn't over. The judge ordered an emergency custody evaluation. And 2 weeks later, I had a hearing where a forensic psychologist presented his evaluation. He'd interviewed the kids, me, tried to interview Brittany, but she refused on the advice of her criminal lawyer she'd just hired. The evaluation found clear evidence of parental alienation. The children had been manipulated to fear and reject their father without any real basis. The psychologist recommended that I get full custody immediately, and that Brittany only have supervised visits while undergoing mandatory therapy. The judge agreed and granted me full custody. I picked up Chloe and Mason from the house that used to be mine. Brittany was crying on the porch, but honestly, I felt no sympathy for her. The kids were confused. Mason was asking why Mommy was crying. Chloe was quiet and scared. I told them we were going to be together now, that Daddy was going to take care of them, and that everything was going to be okay. In August 2023, the FBI arrested Brittany and Zachary. Turns out there were more victims of their scheme than initially thought. They found at least 3 other cases in different states where they'd executed variations of the same fraud. Zachary cooperated with prosecutors and implicated Brittany as the mastermind behind everything, though personally, I think they were equally guilty. Brittany faced between 15 and 20 years in federal prison for multiple charges of fraud, false testimony, conspiracy to commit fraud, and some other technical charges I didn't even understand well. Zachary faced a minimum of 10 years, but would probably get less for cooperating. Oh, and remember Denise, Zachary's wife? Turns out she didn't know anything about the scheme either. She contacted me through my lawyer Philip and basically offered me free legal help if I needed it, because she was processing her own divorce from Zachary and was horrified by what he'd done. She told me Zachary had been acting weird for months, going out at odd hours, spending money they didn't have, and she'd thought she was just being paranoid. When she found out about everything, she kicked him out of the house immediately and filed for divorce. Denise ended up being an unexpected ally in all this. She even helped prosecutors with information about Zachary's finances that led to discovering more evidence. Now, almost 2 years after all this, life is very different. I moved with the kids to a new house in a better neighborhood, far from where all this nightmare happened. It's a big house with a huge yard where the kids can play. It has 5 bedrooms because sometimes my brother and his family come visit us. And there's an office where I'm working on new tech projects. I don't need to work financially, but I like to keep busy. Chloe and Mason are in therapy with a psychologist who specializes in parental alienation. Dr. Diane is her name. They've made incredible progress, especially Chloe, who initially was so afraid of me. Now she's 8 years old, and we're recovering our relationship little by little. She likes to help me cook dinner. We watch movies together on Friday nights, and sometimes she tells me things about school or her friends. Mason is 5 now, and honestly, I think he doesn't remember much of all the drama, which is probably better for him. He's a happy and energetic kid who loves dinosaurs and superheroes. Brittany was sentenced in February 2024 to 18 years in federal prison. She didn't appeal because apparently her lawyer told her if she went to trial, she'd probably get more time. I haven't spoken to her since the day in court, and honestly, I have nothing to say to her. The kids ask about her from time to time. I've told them the truth in an age-appropriate way, like that mommy made some bad decisions and now has to be away for a long time. Chloe understands more than Mason. Sometimes she gets sad, but Dr. Diane says it's normal and healthy for her to process those feelings. Zachary got 8 years as part of his deal with prosecutors. His career as a wannabe influencer obviously ended. His Instagram account was shut down after everything came to light. Denise divorced him, and as far as I know, moved to another city to start over. I sent her a thank you gift, a basket of expensive wines or something, because without her information about Zachary's finances, they probably wouldn't have discovered the full extent of the fraud. With the money, I created a nonprofit foundation that helps parents falsely accused of domestic violence or abuse. It provides legal resources, connects people with specialist lawyers, and funds private investigations when there's suspicion of false accusations. I've helped like 15 parents so far clear their names and recover their children. It's something that gives me purpose beyond just being rich. I feel like something good came out of all this nightmare. Last week, Mason asked me if Mommy was ever going to come back home. I told him the truth, that I didn't know, that maybe when he was much older, like an adult. He thought for a moment, with that serious face he makes when he's processing something important, and then said, "It's okay, Dad. I'm fine here with you and Chloe anyway." He hugged me and went back to playing with his dinosaurs. And that's enough for now, I guess. Every day we're healing a little more, building a new life, and learning to trust again. It's not perfect. There are difficult days, where the kids get sad or where I remember everything and get angry, but we're okay, we're together, and finally the truth came to light.